All right, good morning. Here I am on camera by myself, which I do not love, but still waiting for Sherry. And I had intended to start with reading a bit from David Bentley Hart's Doors of the Sea to kind of kick things off today, anyway. So I suppose it's good that Sherry's not here, as that because then she doesn't have to just listen to me read a wall of text. But this book was very important to me. This is the book that really I had struggled my whole life with the issue of theodicy, and I had read a lot of theodicy and studied a lot of theodicy, and ultimately found them unsatisfying. And David's book, The Doors of the Sea, is like the only honest attempt at theodicy I've ever read. And David ultimately rejects theodicy to point toward resurrection and redemption. And so I'm going to start. This is toward the end of the book. I'm starting on, this is the bottom of page 96, and I'm going to read from there to the end. It's a very short little book, but it's one of my favorites. What looks like a sympathy for Gnosticism in these pages, then, is more truly a prejudice in favor of the New Testament's cosmological and soteriological imagery. Modern Christians may understandably have little knowledge or taste for the angelology or demonology of the early church, but this does not excuse them from grasping how radically the gospel is pervaded by a sense of the brokenness of the fallen world is the work of rebellious rational free will, which God permits its reign, and pervaded also by the sense that Christ comes genuinely to save creation, to conquer, to rescue, to defeat the power of evil in all things. This great narrative of fall and redemption is not a charade, not simply a dramaturgical lesson regarding God's absolute prerogatives prepared for us from eternity, but a real consequence of the mystery of created freedom and the fullness of grace. For at the end of the day, the crude dualism of the Gnostics springs from the same philosophical failing. Hey, Sherry. I'm a, you caught me in the middle of reading. I'm in the middle of reading a passage from Doors of the Sea.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, so let me get back to where I was. Let's see. At the end of the day, the crude dualism of the Gnostics springs from the same philosophical failing as does the most unsophisticated theological monism of divine will. The failure to see how God's active being, through its infinity and transcendence, can make room in itself for the real being of finite creatures without thereby being diminished, and how therefore God's freedom, through its infinity and transcendence, can make room in its determinism, in its determinations for the real freedom of finite rational wills, without thereby being weakened or compromised. All of this, however, is a matter for a much longer and more elaborate book than this. At the moment, it is enough to simply to make the point clear. God's gracious will for his creatures, his willing of all things to his own infinite goodness, is the creative power that makes all things to be and to consummate and the consummate happiness to which all things are called. But this does not, indeed must not mean that everything that happens is merely a direct expression of God's desire for his creatures or an essential stage within the divine plan of history. There are those for whom saying this leaves behind an intolerable remainder, a kind of irrational surd. For them, unless one believes that every event has substantial and organic, not merely accidental or occasional, place in the plot of universal history, and a specific function in the final synthesis of history at the end of time, then somehow the logical coherence of the universe begins to disintegrate. And God's final resolution of the story of the world is little more than a vulgar deus ex machina. But of course, nothing is lost. The coherence of the universe is preserved by God acting to save what he has made, what is real, what has substance, not by providing a divine rationale for every dimension of every event in which his creatures are involved, no matter how much these events might reflect that ultimate privation evil. There is, of course, some comfort to be derived from the thought that everything that occurs at this level of secondary causality in nature or history is governed not only by the transcendent providence, but held by a universal teleology that makes every instance of pain and loss an indispensable moment in the grand scheme whose ultimate synthesis will justify all things. But one should consider the price at which that comfort is purchased. It requires us to believe in and love a God whose good ends will be realized not only in spite of, but entirely by way of every cruelty, every fortuitous misery, every catastrophe, every betrayal, every sin the world has ever known. It requires us to believe in the eternal spiritual necessity of a child dying an agonizing death from diphtheria, a young mother ravaged by cancer, of tens of thousands of Asians swallowed in an instant by the sea, of millions murdered in death camps and gulags and forced famines and so on. It is a strange thing indeed to seek peace in a universe rendered morally intelligible at the cost of a God rendered morally loathsome. Or to phrase it all of this somewhat differently, words we would not utter to ease another's grief, we ought not to speak to satisfy our own sense of piety. In the New York Times this morning, on the last day I have set aside for the writing of this book, there appeared a report from Sri Lanka recounting in part the story of a large man of enormous physical strength who was unable to prevent 4 of his 5 children from perishing in the tsunami, and who, as he recited the names of his lost children to the reporter in descending order of age, ending with the name of his 4-year-old son, was utterly overwhelmed by his own weeping. Only a moral cretin at that moment would have attempted to soothe his anguish by assuring him that his children had died as a result of God's eternal, inscrutable, and righteous counsels, and that in fact their deaths had mysteriously served God's purposes in history, and that all of this was completely necessary for God to accomplish his ultimate design in having created this world. Most of us would have the good sense to be ashamed to speak such words. We would recognize that they would offer no more credible comfort than the vaporings of the most idiotically complacent theodicy, and we would detest ourselves for giving voice to odious banalities and blasphemous flippancies. And this should tell us something, for if we would think it shamefully foolish and cruel to say such things in that moment when another's sorrow is most real and irresistibly painful, then we ought never say them, because what would still our tongues would be the knowledge that we would possess at the time, that we might forget later, that such sentiments would amount not only to an indiscretion or words spoken out of season, but to a vile stupidity and a lie told principally for our own comfort, by which we would try to excuse ourselves for believing in an omnipotent and benevolent God. In the process, moreover, we would be attempting to deny that man a knowledge central to the gospel, the knowledge that the evil of death, its intrinsic falsity, its unjust dominion over the world, is its ultimate nullity. The knowledge that God is not pleased or nourished by our deaths, that he is not the secret architect of evil, that he is the conqueror of hell, that he has condemned all those things by the power of the cross. The knowledge that God is life and light and infinite love, and that the path that leads through nature and history to his kingdom does not simply follow the contours of either nature or history, but obey the logic immanent in them, but is open to us by way of the natural and historical absurdity or outrage of the empty tomb. However, fortunately, I think, we Christians are not obliged, and perhaps not even allowed, to look upon the devastation of that day, to look, that is, upon the entire literal rim of the Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal and the upper Indian Ocean strewn with tens of thousands of corpses, a third of them children, and to attempt to console ourselves or others with vacuous cant about their ultimate meaning or purpose residing in all that misery. Ours is, after all, a religion of salvation. Our faith is in a God who has come to rescue his creation from the absurdity of sin, the emptiness of waste and death. The forces, whether calculating malevolence or imbecile chance, that shatter living souls. And so we are permitted to hate these things with perfect hatred. And we are not only permitted, but required to believe that cosmic time as we know it, through all the immensity of its geological ages and historical epochs, is only a shadow of true time, and this world only a shadow of the fuller, richer, more substantial, more glorious creation that God intends, and to believe also that all of nature is a shattered mirror of divine beauty, still full of light, but riven by darkness. That ours is a fallen world is not, of course, a truth demonstrable to those who do not believe. But it is not a first principle of faith, but rather something revealed to us by what we know of Christ, in the light cast back by his saving action in history upon the whole of time. The fall of rational creation and the subjection of the cosmos to death is something that appears to us nowhere within the unbroken time of nature or history. We cannot search it out within the closed continuum of our wounded world. It belongs to another frame of time, another kind of time, one more real than the time of death. When, however, we learn in Christ the nature of our first estate and the divine destiny to which we are called, we begin to see more clearly. We are more able to look upon the world with the eye of charity, and there it is in all things of earth a hidden glory waiting to be revealed, more radiant than a million suns, more beautiful than the most generous imagination or most ardent desire can now conceive. Or rather, it is a glory not entirely hidden, veiled, rather, but shining in and through and upon all things. The imperishable goodness of all being does in fact show itself in all that is. It shows itself in the vast waters of the Indian Ocean, and it is not hard to see when those waters are silver and azure under the midday sky, or gold and indigo in the light of the setting sun, or jet and pearl in the light of the moon, and when their smoothly surging tides break upon the shore and harmlessly recede. But it is still there even when the doors of the sea, having broken their seals, those waters become suddenly dull and opaque with gray or sallow silt, and rise up to destroy and kill without will or thought or purpose or mercy. At such times, to see the goodness indwelling all creation requires a labor of vision that only a faith in Easter can sustain. But it is there, effulgent, unfading, innocent, but languishing in the bondage to corruption, groaning in anticipation of a glory yet to be revealed, both a promise of the kingdom yet to come and a portent of its beauty. Until that final glory, however, the world remains divided between two kingdoms, where light and darkness, life and death grow up together and await the harvest. In such a world, our portion is charity, and our sustenance is faith, and so it will be until the end of days. As for comfort, when we seek it, I can imagine none greater than the happy knowledge that when I see the death of a child, I do not see the face of God, but the face of his enemy. Such faith might never seem credible to someone like Ivan Karamazov, or still the disquiet of his conscience, or give him peace in a place of rebellion, but neither is it a faith that his arguments can defeat. For it is a faith that has set us free from optimism long ago and taught us hope instead. And now we are able to rejoice that we are saved through the immanent mechanisms of history and nature, not through the immanent mechanisms of history and nature, but by grace, that God will not unite all of history's many strands into one great synthesis, but will judge much of history false and damnable, that he will not simply reveal the sublime logic of fallen nature, but will strike off the fetters in which creation languishes, and that rather than showing us how the tears of a small girl suffering in the dark were necessary for the building of the kingdom, he will instead raise her up and wipe away all tears from her eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, nor any more pain. For the former things will have passed away, and he that sits upon the throne will say, Behold, I make all things new. That passage.
Okay, you recover. You recover, Nate. When you're reading that, I thought I'm gonna read this to close it up because it's beautiful.
Go for
it's
it.
called The Children's Heaven by George MacDonald. The infant lies in blessed ease upon his mother's breast. No storm, no dark the baby sees invade his heaven of rest. And I might cry when I read this.
That's okay. It's Grail Country where we cry.
He nothing knows of change or death. Her face, his holy skies. The air he breathes, his mother's breath. His stars, his mother's eyes. Yet half the soft winds wandering there are sighs that come of fears. The dew slow falling through that air, it is the dew of tears. And ah, my child, thy heavenly home hath storms as well as dew. Black clouds fill sometimes all its dome and quench the starry blue. My smile would win no smile again if baby saw the things that ache across his mother's brain, the while to him she sings. Thy faith in me is faith in vain. I am not what I seem. O dreary day, O cruel pain that wakes thee from thy dream. Nay, pity not his dream so fair. Fear thou no waking grief. O safer he than though thou were good as his vague belief. There is a heaven, that heaven above, whereon he gazes now, a truer love than in thy kiss, a better friend than thou. The Father's arms fold like a nest, both thee and him about. His face looks down a heaven of rest, where comes no dark, no doubt. Its mists are clouds of stars that move on with progress rife. Its winds the goings of his love, its dew the dew of life. We for our children seek thy heart, for them we lift our eyes. Lord, should their faith in us depart, let faith in thee arise. When childhood's visions them forsake, to women grown and men, back to thy heart their hearts, O take, and bid them dream again. I told you I would cry.
Yeah. Yeah. I can remember, I think when I was, when I would still call myself an agnostic, in my, gosh, let's see how old I would have been my mid 20s. My grandfather, let's see, I was born, yeah, I was like 20, actually not even my mid 20s, I was in my early 20s, I was like 24. My grandfather passed in 95, and I was very close to my grandfather, and I actually gave the eulogy, and the eulogy I gave sounded a lot like that. That's one of the reasons that passage kills me, is that the themes that David works on in that passage of Doors of the Sea are very much the same themes that I worked on in the eulogy I gave my grandfather. Because there's like the other, like that book, and then David's Bentley Hart's essay Christ and Nothing were the things that were the two things that like made me realize that I had been a Christian all along, and that the faith had been presented to me through a distorted lens, which is why I had rejected it. And it's obvious, like, cause like when I gave that eulogy in '95, it's like, if you'd asked me if I was a Christian, I said no, I'm an agnostic, and yet there was this fundamental sense in which I felt like in some sense like something resembling the power of redemption and resurrection has to be the case, or the ultimate, or it's nihilism is the only alternative. It's either redemption and resurrection or nihilism, and there is no other way. And which is why the pagan myths have this vaguely hint toward redemption and resurrection, right? Even though they don't yet have the fullness of the Christian revelation, they're pointing in that direction, because the only real alternative is nihilism. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why I read this, because it feels, that part of Doors of the Sea, it feels like David is saying, take them back to thy heart, and their hearts, O take, and bid them dream again.
Yeah, the
right?
only thing that you can offer someone who's grieving is to be there for them. Like very. I mean, there are people who are cold-hearted enough to offer kind of like rational explanations for that kind of thing, but there aren't many, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have the good sense to just like, you know,
I also
bake
imagine,
bake a grieving person a casserole and be there as a shoulder to cry on. You know, don't.
yeah, and I also imagine George MacDonald writing this because he lost two children, and I can imagine him watching his wife, holding that dying child in her arms, and um, yeah,
Yeah, um, yeah. George MacDonald's biography is interesting because he's quite evidently a joyful person, and at the same time he
hmm
has a life that is definitely not is very much touched by suffering and tragedy, and yet
yeah,
he maintains a sort of joyfulness through it all. That's really astounding, actually. Um, so
yeah.
let's shall we invite other folks to come in and play with us
So,
this
well,
morning?
before you do that, Nate,
Yeah.
is this your theme, theodicy?
I don't know. I mean, I just like felt like I don't know why I decided I wanted to read that. I think I wanted to. I don't know. I just like decided to do it. Like sometimes I don't know why I make the decisions that I make. You know, I don't know why I decided to change the theme of the conference that we're planning. Like spontaneously after thinking it was going to be one thing for a very long time, and then like just
hmm
having this sudden like no, it needs to be this. And it wasn't now, and to be fair, like that wasn't born of a moment. Like there'd been this thing I've been thinking through and thinking about estuary and why estuary works when it works. When I was at the DC conference, I actually like I spoke to this concept of witnessing, and how sometimes like in the kind of like in the frame of American Christianity on the influence of like individualism, it's like we kind of have forgotten that witnessing in its deepest sense has an implied reciprocity. That witnessing always involves a being witnessed, and that it
Yeah.
is that the deeper sense of what witness means and why witness is powerful is in that reciprocity. And I think that estuary, when it's functioning well, creates a space where that kind of witnessing can happen.
Yeah, it's
And it,
interesting you talking about that because yesterday in the essay that we read by George MacDonald, he talks about letting your light shine, right? And how that happens. I mean, in short, he would say it happens through your obedience to God in doing the thing that is put before you, right? Not following the law, not trying to be Jesus, not trying to be an example, but simply doing the thing that is put before you, which is what you just did, right? You read
right,
you the thing that was put before you this morning was to read from Doors of the Sea, right? And so you did that. That is obedience to George
mm-hmm.
MacDonald. And it's in doing those things that we are a witness. We let our light shine, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what you did this morning. You shone, Nate.
Yeah, I don't know.
You did.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and let's see who wants to come in and talk with us this morning. I have no agenda, folks. I'm just let's talk. Actually, I do have an agenda. That's not true. Let's be here
Oh,
to
there you
witness
go.
and be witness.
Okay, good.
So come
To
in
shine our
and
lights.
speak what's on your heart. We'll
hmm
listen.
Yeah.
And while we're waiting to see if anybody wants to come and join us, what do you I mean, that was what you shared was lovely. You have anything else that's like on your mind this morning?
Not really. No, I don't have anything pressing. I've been ruminating on the George MacDonald essay that we read yesterday, which
Oh,
is
whoops.
which was
Hey,
great.
Eno, welcome.
Normally I have church activities Saturday, but I am sick, so I'm happy to join both of you. So thanks for sharing.
Welcome.
It's powerful.
I'm going to answer this question really quick because it's a good question. How is Job integrated? I would say that David's answer in Doors of the Sea is very much the same answer that's given to Job, because note that David is not trying to seek a rational theodicy at all. He is just pointing us toward the promise of resurrection and redemption. And this is the same answer ultimately that Job is given, which is to trust in God's ends. So,
Well, Job actually sees resurrection. He sees it in creation.
well, he experiences it
It's
too.
my favorite. Well, it's my favorite part. He says to his friends, "Well, wait a minute. Doesn't a stump? I've seen a stump put forth a shoot, right? Something that appears to be dead." And he says, I've seen that. I've seen stumps put forth shoots. Could there be life after death? And his friends are like, no, we rip the stump out and we burn it. That's their answer. Which is a familiar one, isn't it? It's a very familiar answer.
We tend to put a box around God and what God can and cannot do. And it tends to humble us in precisely the right way at the right time in our lives. So,
Yeah.
Well, so Neil, did you have anything in particular on your mind when you joined us this morning?
I guess something that I was thinking earlier today that relates to this theme of theodicy is because I've thought through my own life, my own experiences in terms of the suffering that I've experienced in my life. And the conclusion that I've reached personally is that every bit of suffering that I have experienced in my life has been necessary, and perhaps even justified. And that even includes the suffering that I would say was a result of evil or malevolence, was necessary, in that it has strengthened my faith as a result. It has brought me to a better and stronger place. And I guess I would ask both of you that, because I know for both, well, I don't know the full details of both of your lives, but I listened to you enough to know that it's been an up and down journey for many years. And reflecting back on that journey, reflecting back on that suffering, would you say it is necessary? And I'll pause there.
I'll let you go first, Nate.
So there is always a certain level of like necessary suffering, and I think it's like well, I don't know if I would say necessary or let's say unavoidable, maybe, right? I don't know if it like necessity gives it a sort of ontological status that I don't want to grant it.
Right.
Right. So like for example, like for one of Aquinas' arguments for in the Quinque Viae for the existence of God is the argument from necessity. So really God is the only necessary thing. And there's no evil in God. So there is no such, I would say there is, so now, then that becomes a question of like, what do we want to link suffering to evil? That's another question altogether. But I would say that suffering is sometimes unavoidable as a consequence of living in a fallen world. So then, what's important is what our response to the suffering is. There is nothing good, like suffering that can be avoided. Has like there's nothing positive about it. Like there's no like there's suffering that is avoidable should just be avoided, and you shouldn't bring it on yourself or bring it on others. But sometimes suffering is unavoidable, and then I think where its potential for the good is entirely based on the way we respond to it. And I actually think from that you can see that like in the passage that I read from David there, it's like the proper response to suffering is usually to be with the person who suffers. If you're not the person, right? So like, which Job's friends kind of get right at first, right? They actually go there and they sit with him. But then it's like, so where they go wrong is like when they stop just sitting there and being with him, and then it's like, then they want to try to come up with a rational explanation for his suffering, rather than just continuing to sit there and be with him through his suffering. So that's yeah, that's Sherry. I'm sure you have thoughts.
Now we have to be in the suffering. Here we go. No.
I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I don't know how if I can make them, gel. The first thing that comes to my mind is that iconographically speaking, suffering is represented by the thorns, right? So we go out of the garden and into the thorns. And then another beautiful image is that when Christ dies, he wears the thorns as a crown. Okay? Like Luke's hair. So
My crown of thorns.
He wears the thorns as a crown. So to me, he's declaring something, right? And then we have to understand that it is, Paul talks about by our weaknesses, God's strength is made perfect, right? Like God's strength is revealed in our weaknesses. But then we could go to the analogy of a seed. And we could talk about how the seed has to go into the ground. It has to die. It's in the dark. It's in the damp, right? It feels like it's dying, but actually it's putting down roots. Mm-hmm. And yesterday in the faith essay, George MacDonald talks about that root as faith. That's faith, okay? And what springs from the root is hope. Okay, right. So, and then the plant comes up out of the ground, and what does it meet? Adversity, right? But it needs that adversity in order to become a strong, fruitful plant. So like Luke and I talked yesterday about how if you take seedlings from the house and you just stick them in the garden, they'll all die, right? They'll just wither at the stem closest to the ground and die, right? Because they have no strength. They haven't experienced any adversity, no cold, no wind, no nothing. So, and the problem I think that people have is that they either or everything. That's the problem, right? Instead of saying both and. So it's like, then you get people self-flagellating, right? And trying to beat something out of themselves instead of realizing that they're a plant and they're not going to produce fruit from the get-go. They need to grow, right? And that growing is strengthened by adversity. right? And so who put us out of the garden? Who did that? We and God. Okay? Yep. We and God working together, and it's a co-creation. Everything that happens after that is a co-creation between us and God. And so this is why, like I said to Nate earlier, we need to do the thing that is put before us. Right? Like I had this conversation with Wayne the other day, and he said that, the underlying question in all the scripture is, who do you say that I am? Right? And I said to him, yeah. And that question is not because Jesus doesn't ask that question because he wants to know. He wants you to answer the question.
Right.
Who do you say I am?
I've thought about why Peter is the rock, and I think you're hitting it, Sherry, in that Peter oscillates far harder and more intensely on an ongoing basis than any other disciple that I know. He experiences the highs and the lows. Like he in some ways he's the worst apostle, and then because he's so sure of himself, and then he denies Christ 3 times. He's so sure. And then in other ways, he's the first one out of the boat. He's the crazy one jumping into the water. He's,
well, what about this, Neil? This is just passing through my mind right now, but Peter believes everything. He believes it first. Okay. He's a believer. So like when he denies Christ, he actually believes it's over. Okay. He believes that. He sees the thing that presents itself before him, and he's like, it's over. And I gotta get the hell out of here. I gotta hide. Right? He believes it. But he also believes he can walk on water. And that's why he appears so, crazy, right? Because he just believes the thing that, and it's in the afterthought that he has to spend that time afterwards going, well, wait a minute, and then he remembers Jesus said, you're going to deny me, right?
Peter's not a ruminator.
He's not a ruminator. There you go. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I may or may not have deep understanding of what it's like to be that kind of person.
You're muted, Luke. Yeah, you're muted. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Now better?
Yeah, I think that's actually the real mic there. I think you got the real mic.
I think I figured it out because I YouTubed how to use a Yeti mic, and it's like, change your settings to the input to Yeti mic. It's pretty brilliant.
You sound good.
Thank you.
So you should join us, Matthew, if you have a topic.
Yeah. So I don't think there is such a thing as unnecessary suffering. I think that's a
I'm with you.
I think that's a miscategorization of the way. I think whatever you have to go through, you have to go through. And to some degree, it's, I don't know, Cal and I talk about this stuff.
Yeah, no. I'm going to push back real hard there. So the Holocaust is necessary suffering?
Bullshit. Well, see, this
is bullshit. No, it's not.
Luke, the problem is
what is you have to what are you doing to what are you doing to the ontological status of evil when you posit necessary suffering?
Yeah. Okay. So Nate, I can only apply that rubric that Luke just said. I can only apply it to myself, and I do not understand the ways of God. I just don't do it. But that rubric that Luke just applied, if I apply to it myself, anyway.
Yeah. Well, okay. Here's my 2 cents. The problem with where this is going to go really wrong is using the term necessary or unnecessary.
Yeah, that's why I said unavoidable. I'll accept, like, there's unavoidable suffering. Yes, there is unavoidable suffering. But it's a consequence. Specifically, you have to stipulate that the reason there is unavoidable suffering is because we live in a fallen world.
That's why I pointed out the garden and the thorns and who kicked who out of the who got kicked out of the garden, who kicked who out of the like. It's a hot mess, right? Like seriously.
I guess part of it for me is I just don't, and I know you probably wouldn't either, Nate, but like I don't live in a world where I think counterfactuals and like middle knowledge are a real thing. Like that's all nonsense to me. I think whatever is, and like I've said before, I think this is the best of all possible worlds because it's the only possible world. Unless you want to start talking about like whatever infinite universes, which is then just the universe. And you're saying like every possible iteration of me exists somewhere out there in the multiverse. Who cares? Fine. But like this,
Another thing I hate,
this is what I know.
I was a big reader of Voltaire when I was younger. I loved Voltaire. And I especially loved Candide. And I am not a fan of the notion of a best of all possible worlds because we don't live in the best of all possible worlds. We live in a fallen world.
Yeah, but I still think it is the best of all possible worlds. I don't think there could have been a world because it's kind of like this. God actualizes the best world because it's just the world that it is. Like I don't think there's an alternate. I can't imagine some world that would be better than this, because then that would be the world that exists.
I just go back to God's response to Job. Like, where were you when I set the foundations of the world, when I set all of this into motion? And it's like, I have no idea how bad or how good it could be. But fundamentally, that faith for me is whatever I'm going to come up with or whatever I'm going to judge as better is way worse, And that's been my own experience. And whenever I do that, like, oh, I know, Neil, that this is the right way to go, I get humbled hard every time.
Okay, there's a problematic here, and I'm going to throw it out to Nate because I'm curious how he's going to deal with it. To the woman, he said, God, I will sharply increase your pain in childbirth. In pain, you will bring forth children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And to Adam, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I have commanded you not to eat, cursed is the ground because of you. Through toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it will yield for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your bread until you return to the ground, because out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So, I mean, I'm not a fan of the terms necessary and unnecessary because they put you in the world of either orism to me. Like, if they're necessary, then they have to be. And if they're unnecessary, then they shouldn't be. And now we're in a quandary, right? But the point is, it is, right? We suffer. And it's what are we going to do with that? And like the poem that I read, The Children's Heaven, is a poem about a mother holding her dying child in her arms and the child looking into her eyes and seeing heaven. Okay? And not because it's dying, but because she is its heaven. She is its heaven. Okay? But his heaven, as George points out, the child's heaven is full of dark clouds because the mother knows the child is suffering and dying. Right? And so she's mourning already. But he ends the poem with, and bid them dream again, right? So there's a looking beyond all of it. And he also portrays God as having his arms around both mother and child, right, in this moment. Because both are suffering and both are dying. The mother might not be dying, but she's dying inside, right? So it's a very co-mingled, co-existential experience that we have in the world with God as our comforter, and yet here we are, right? And so that's why I love the poem, because George says we need to dream again. We need to see beyond, right? It's also why I use the plant analogy, because without adversity, we have no strength. We wither and die, right? So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I think like first of all, back to the first the first part, like where you're sharing from Genesis. I think that's like just God saying, God's not talking about what he wants, but he's talking about what the consequence of what has happened is, right? So it's not like God's not willing those things to be, but the consequence of the fall is that that's how things are going to be.
Well, I'm not sure, because I don't know what the Hebrew says, Nate, but it says, I will sharply increase your pain in childbirth. I will. I mean, I don't know if that's a bad translation. It's possible. But yeah, I'll just.
But Sherry, so as a mother, this is true as a father too, but I feel like it's a deeper, more intense truth as a mother. When you bring a child into the world, you know that ultimately that child will suffer and die.
Mm-hmm.
So why do it? If that child's just going to suffer and die, I mean, we'll go all the way back to, who was the guy that Jordan Peterson debated on? This is a way back, South African guy, anti-natalist. Like we're just bringing more suffering into the world to suffer and die. And I think about this in relation to my own daughter. It's like, would I prefer that she live in a world of just perfect beauty all the time? And this was the original Peterson that really latched into my heart, which is like, you want to be the person at your father's funeral who's keeping it together and holding the whole family together. And that's who I want my daughter to be. And my daughter can't become that person unless, like you said, she grows in that difficult environment of the elements that are testing her and molding her and changing her. But it's not up to me to do that. I cannot protect my daughter from the world. I can't do it. But maybe what I can do is instill a faith in her where when things do get rough, that she has practices and fundamentally a faith that she can fall back to, and that can lift her up when the thorns of the world are pulling her down.
Well, the thing with the book of Job that people have the most difficulty with is Job wants an answer to his suffering, okay? And he doesn't get one. There's no answer for his suffering. He gets in my opinion, he gets a place in the world. He gets remembered. God knows that he's there because he shows up and has a conversation with him, right? Like, that's a big deal. That's a pretty big deal, right? Job's like, I want to talk to you about this. I need to know, right? And his friends are like, no, don't do that. Just repent, because for them, what their world consisted of, if you do good things, you'll get good things. If you do bad things, you'll get bad things. And that's like Christianity. It's karma. It's karma.
Well, that's yeah, exactly. That's
and we fall into it really, really easily. Okay, because it's kind of like what do you call that? You touch the hot pot, you get burned. You don't touch the hot pot again, right? It's cause and effect. That's what I'm looking for. But the question that's being answered in the book of Job is, why do the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper? That's the question, okay? Because for the status quo was the righteous prosper and the wicked suffer, okay? That's the cause and effect thing. But that gets crossed, right? Where the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. and that's why Job insists on his righteousness, and God calls him righteous. God validates it. He's like, yeah, you are. Mm-hmm. And that's the end of the conversation, essentially, right? So what does God do in his speech? He shows him the whole story, right? The foundations of the earth, creation, the craziness of creation, you know, how things appear one way, but they really aren't that way. That's a lot of what the God speech is. It appears like this, but it isn't like this. It's not what you think it is, right? And so for me, what I take out of that is that the warning is, don't believe your eyes, in a sense, right? It's a spiritual journey. You need to dig down below what you think is happening. And what you're going to find when you do that is that God remembers you. You're not going to get an answer. You're going to find out that God knows you, that he loves you, and that he's always with you. And that's it, in my opinion. Humbly. And you know, if you think that there's, you know, necessary suffering, then you might fall into the trap of necessarily making yourself suffer. And if you think there's unnecessary suffering, then you might fall into the trap of Ivan Karamazov, or what's that guy's name? Benatar? Somebody put it in here.
Benatar, I think that's right. Yeah.
Right? So you can't, it's this fine line that we walk upon, right? When I look down on it, it is there and then gone. Oh, how I weary of the light that shines, making it thick once, making it fine. Like, you know, it's a, like Jesus said, the way is narrow, right? Like, and you got to watch out that you don't slide off onto one side or the other. And that's the either or, I think.
But to go back to Peter, I mean, I think for me,
False step.
Sure. To go back to Peter, so Peter's always sliding off that path, but what makes him different, I think, is he's always gets right back on the path. You know, would Judas have been forgiven if Judas went back afterwards and truly repented? And like, we don't know. So I personally think Judas's greatest sin was his unwillingness to ask for forgiveness, or unwillingness to repent after the fact. And because he was so deep into his shame that he was unwilling to do that. And so what I remind myself time and time again is repent and believe, repent and believe. No matter how many times I fall off the bandwagon.
Luke, say suffering is a gift of the holy. Say that to a mother who just lost their child to cancer. Come on. You just can't. You can't absolutize things like that. That is not. That is not a mature or balanced way to treat suffering. It just isn't.
Yeah. See, the problem. It's not like here. I don't disagree with this, but I would never say it.
Can be. If he said suffering can be a gift to the holy, that is very different from saying suffering is a gift to the holy. Because
I could say is, but to the holy, and the holy doesn't have to declare that, right? This is the thing. If you look at the lives of saints, they don't tell you that you need to suffer. They talk about their suffering. They talk about what they've learned throughout their suffering. Some of them actually died, you know. But like Nate said, you can't absolutize it. So this is one of those moments where I think that we have to keep the implicit, because when we make it explicit, we destroy the actual the beauty of it. And I know that might be hard to swallow, but when I read The Children's Heaven, about a child who's dying in the arms of his mother, it was beautiful because George showed us how beautiful it can be
Let me
without endorsing the suffering. Okay.
So clearly Luke missed the very beginning of the stream. So if he had been listening from the beginning, there is you wouldn't say that to a suffering mother. That's right. This is from what I read at the beginning of the stream. And this should tell us something, for if we would think it shamefully foolish and cruel to say such things in the moment when another's sorrow is most real and irrepressibly painful, then we ought never say them, because what would still our tongues would be knowledge, which we would possess at the time, though we might forget it later, that such sentiments would amount not only to an indiscretion or words spoken out of season, but to a vile stupidity, and a lie told principally for our own comfort, by which we would try to excuse ourselves for believing in an omnipotent and benevolent God.
You know, the thing about the Karamazov story with Ivan and Alyosha, and Ivan's raging against God, like literally, he's just like, I can't do this for these reasons, and they're all really, really great reasons. But the interesting part about that whole interaction is that Alyosha doesn't say anything. He kisses him, right? And that's exactly what Nate was talking about when he said you have to go there and be with, right, the person in their suffering. Ivan is suffering. He's torn apart. He has no joy. He has no peace, right? And
Right.
and from the essay yesterday, George MacDonald says that the fruit of the plant that is rooted in faith is joy and peace, right? That's what shines in the world.
Right. Yeah, there's a reason why first of all I have to say Sourdough Neil is like one of the best handles. It's that's really the only reason I highlighted that, because it sounds like a mob name. Yeah, Sourdough Neil. It's like a mob nickname.
Luke, I don't think that we're disagreeing.
No, dude, I'm not calling you a heretic.
It's only because the strength of your relationship with Luke and vice versa that you both feel comfortable enough to express strong disagreeing views,
right.
which is beautiful because you built that relationship.
So first of all, there are
5 years.
like you couldn't find two people who are more theologically aligned in this little corner than Luke Thompson and myself. So exactly. It's funny when we have these disagreements, but like our disagreements really come down to like, here's where we agree on a whole bunch of stuff, but there's a layer of Luke that is very much formed by a Reformed tradition, which is has no root in me at all, because my Protestant background is Pentecostal. So like I have no sympathy toward Reformed theology at all. It was never part of what formed me. I don't understand it. And it's not in me the way it's in Luke. So we'll kind of like butt heads because of that sometimes.
You know, this is the people that watch Grail Country. People that watch Grail Country don't realize how heated some of our discussions have been.
Oh yeah, it's not. We don't just all agree with each other all the time. It's not just like, oh, it's a bunch of universalists that agree with each other all the time. Oh my God, no, not even close.
Welcome to the kingdom. I mean, Thunderdome. Go
ahead. Do we call you Mills, or do you have a name?
Chance.
Nice. I like it. That's a good one.
Yeah. I've had a lot of thoughts about Job, and I was wondering if I could share something real quick. I've
go for it.
Lost the thread. All right. So I noticed, like, when the God's legal team was talking, the three guys, they were going on and on. One of the things popped up that was minimally plausible was, what if there's some secret sin?
Yeah.
he could have taken that. He could have said, I don't know what it is. I don't know what I did to piss you off, God, but I'm sorry for it. He said, I can't believe that.
Yeah.
It's like he was looking for restoration of that inner coherence that enables faith. And
Yeah.
I think that's why he kept pressing.
adamant about that.
It's really good.
Yeah. He just said, you know what? I did nothing wrong. End of the story. That's what Job
Even
said.
if he did, I mean, we're all flawed. We all sin in some ways. And surely he knew that. But he said, I don't believe that. Like, I don't feel that. And he kept
What you mean?
pressing.
I'm just curious now. Like he didn't believe that there was a secret sin, or that secret sin mattered, or what are you hitting on there?
I don't think that resonated for him as like a reasonable cause for everything that he was going through. I think Jordan Peterson put it this way, like he's like, maybe I sinned, but like I'm no less good than the average good man, right? Like there's something out of whack here. Like I can't feel that there's something there that makes this make sense.
Well, see,
And
for me, the interesting thing about Job is that it begins with God saying, "Have you seen my servant Job? He's perfect and righteous in every way." Okay, God makes that declaration.
yeah.
And then at the end, he says the same thing, basically. Job is righteous. He's spoken correctly, God says. Okay, so everything that came out of his mouth was right. And so when I read the book of Job years ago, and this is before, like Jess and I, Jess should be in this conversation right now, but when I read the book of Job,
in general, Jess should be on Grill Country more often. I miss Jess.
Years ago, I remember thinking to myself, okay, so now for me, the question is, what is righteousness? What is righteousness? Yeah. Okay, because if God is saying Job is righteous, it doesn't mean he's never sinned. It's something else.
Right. He's a righteous man, but he's still a man. He's not
still
the God.
A man.
He's not the God man. He can't act. He can't create the world in the way that Christ creates the world.
Yeah. Well,
that is the world of the creation. The world that God's intends is created through Christ.
He's not ex nihilo creating the world, right? He's not doing that. He's not creating it out of nothing, but he mediates. Like at the end of the book, he mediates heaven and earth.
Which is something which we all do, and it is our meaning making capacity and our imagination that is what allows us to do the subcreation.
Well, for me,
which is why Job's friends are reprimanded, by the way, because they use their meaning making capacity in order to try to rationally explain away Job's suffering rather than just being with their friend in his suffering.
Well, Can I ask this question? Can I ask, is Job complaining to God over and over? Is that a sin? Like him just venting to God and going like, what the heck? Like because no. Oh, okay. All right. So getting angry with God is not a sin.
No, of course not. George MacDonald has a whole sermon on that in his Voice of Job sermon, which you should read.
So I agree with you, Sherry. I don't know if I've ever heard a theologian say that, because in my mind, I'm thinking God would way rather me get angry directly at God than take out that anger on the people, his children, the people I love in my life.
But God seems to test his servants by deliberately doing things that make them get angry so that they can learn something in the process. For example, when God is negotiating with Abraham, how many righteous people need to be found in Sodom and Gomorrah in order to spare it. That's an argument. Is Abraham sinning and trying to save the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah? And so obviously not. So God seems to actually invite that kind of engagement with him because it helps us grow.
Sort of the wrestling of Jacob.
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially, what MacDonald points out in his Voice of Job sermon, which is really, really long and well articulated, and I'm just going to make it like this big, is that God wants us to make a claim on him. Okay? That's the thing that he wants us to do. Because And George doesn't make this explicit, but I just put it in these terms, because if we don't, he doesn't exist for us. Yeah. He isn't real. We have no relationship to him. We don't depend on him. We don't think he can solve our problems. None of that is true, right? So when we turn in anger and we ask God for a solution to our problems, it's because he's the only one who can do that for us.
That's St. Paul, pray without ceasing. Even when you're angry, you could still pray. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Well, yeah, like I don't know. I said that to Wayne too. When I read the book of Job, I remember thinking to myself, wow, we talk about personal relationship, evangelicals, right? Personal relationship with God. It's like the big thing, but it's not personal, because nobody would talk to God the way Job does. We've created an etiquette around God, right? That has made him untouchable to us.
I don't know, man. If you've heard me rant at God in my car when I'm all alone in my car.
Well, that's good.
I'm not talking about individuals, but I'm talking about generally speaking, right? There's this, people are always shocked with Job because of the way he speaks to God. Not even what he's saying, like not the content of his speech, but just the tone, Yeah. So I find it interesting.
Yeah, Job gets really close to the point of asking the question, is God incompetent? Or is he cruel? Is he sadistic? These are the classic Gnostic questions. And he gets really close to asking them.
He does. Yeah. And I mean, how can you find out if those things are true or not if you don't ask the question? Like, you know what I'm saying? If you just, steer clear of it because it might make, your pastor uncomfortable or somebody in your church uncomfortable. But back in the back of your mind, you're thinking it all the time. And yet you don't believe God loves you enough to hear that out of your mouth. Like, if my children thought something ill of me and never approached me with it and said, Mom, listen, is this what you're doing? And I never had an opportunity to say, no, let me tell you how this is. And I know what it looks like, but it's not what it seems. And this is what God's speech is about, right? I know what it looks like, but it's not what it seems. If my children never approached me and asked me those questions, how could I ever explain they would have a false image of who I am?
Yeah, Elihu tells Job, look up. Do you see the clouds? Do you not see that they're above you? He's saying, like, there's a higher order to this whole thing. Like, your little immediate experience exists within the context of nested layers of reality. Mm-hmm. And what's ultimately good may not be immediately good for you in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's what Job needed in order to, like, restore that inner coherence that enables that faith to persist.
Well, see,
I think he was running on willpower.
I came to the conclusion that righteousness, in light of the book of Job, is integrity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's that integrity that we have to cling to, and that gives us the capability to actually have a personal relationship with God, right? Because then we can be authentic with God. We can, just read the Psalms.
Yeah.
Like nothing is forbidden in the Psalms. Everything is expressed.
Can you elaborate a little bit about what you're talking? Like, because I know, like, when you say integrity, like you and Jess spent a long time talking about the notion of integrity, and so people hearing it for the first time probably would benefit from an elaboration of what exactly you mean by integrity, because you have a very specific idea of what integrity means when you say that.
Well, I think it's who you really are, right? Integer is whole, right? Cool. To be complete, to be whole. And it is, to me anyway, it is the image of God inside of us, right? And it's that which connects us, like which makes us his children, right? So
It's also here's an interesting thing about when you talk about integrity that way, right? That's where it's connected to a sense of the wholeness of the person. That means that it doesn't look any one way that you can apply universally to all persons.
and it's also not dual, right? You're not it's a non-dual. Like, it's not like you're not deliberating. Maybe it's even close to the natural will that Maximus talks about, right? Where like, Job doesn't deliberate about how he's going to speak to God. He doesn't say, well, I'd like to say this, but I know it's probably not good, so I'll say it like that. He just says, right? He speaks from his, I don't know what you want to call it, his
He's
image,
being who he is.
who he really is.
That's what and
Who he really is.
you can't actually you can't have integrity if you aren't being who you really are, because it defies the notion of integrity. If you're just like putting everything through a filter or a mask, and you're not being the person that you truly are, then you have no integrity.
Well, okay, here's something interesting now that's just coming to my mind, because George MacDonald talks about having faces, right? Until we have faces, which is where C.S. Lewis gets it. And in Judaism, being oriented towards God is being face to face with God, right? Facing. And I've thought, I'm still thinking about that whole concept. But there's something about the face that is, it's a unity of multiplicity, right? So it's the person, it's who we are. And Job asks constantly for face to face with God in the book. I want a face to face. And that's not by chance. That's not just a colloquial phrase, because people then knew what that meant. Like, you can't see my face and live, right? So I think this also points towards integrity, right? I want my face, the who I am, wants to have a conversation with the I am, right?
Well,
I
there's a
am
right-
wants
right
to talk
face your
to
accuser.
I am.
Face to face also implies a level of equality too, because you don't, like in the ancient world, you don't have a conversation face to face with your superior. You don't look your superior, your hierarchical superior in the eye. To have a conversation with someone face to face automatically implies a friendship relationship, and a relationship that has an equal grounding.
Right, which is why I don't believe God was angry with Job at any given point in that whole book. A lot of people think that because God said, gird up your loins, I'm going to speak now. Jess and I talked about this, and both of us were like next to tears, because what God was doing was giving Job back his dignity when he said that. Mm-hmm. You're a man, Job, and let's have a talk. And he actually says to him, do you have anything more to say? And Job's like, no, I can't. No. God says, okay, I'll speak now.
Isn't that what every father wants of their children?
Hello.
Like the ability for their children to stand on their own 2 feet, even if let's say they are defeating something that I intend, but if they're standing for their own principles, if they're standing for their own face, you could say, and they're doing it based on something that's instilled within them, that's way better than a child who's only propped up based on the father or mother's own strength.
Yeah, you want them, and also a good parent wants them to have integrity, to be the person that they are. They don't want them to be like some sort of like carbon copy of themselves. They want them to be their own person. So I'll just give you an example. Like my son this morning, I was talking to my son this morning. He's like, he wants to be a published game designer, and he's like working on like designing this dungeon, and it's all full of like these little like kind of like jokes and memes and like shit that I would never ever put in anything that I wrote. But that's who he is. And I was very proud of him for like designing and like and not trying to imitate myself, not trying to be like me, but to like be his own person and to and to create with a vision that that maintains his integrity of who he is as a person. And of course, that makes me happy. How could it not?
Well, I mean, if you're not doing that for your children, then you have Munchausen syndrome. Like, if you're trying to make them dependent and codependent on you, so that it's brutal. Yeah,
Definitely. Also, if my kids ever stopped asking why, like that would be a really sad moment for me.
yeah.
How old are
The
your
fact
kids?
that they're 8 and 13, and I love those moments when they're just like, why? And, yeah, okay.
Because I'm your father and I say so. That's why, son.
Sometimes you say that. Sometimes you say that.
Sometimes you do have to say that because the explanation is too complex.
Or sometimes you
beyond
just
their
need something to
understanding.
happen.
Yeah, and also like I used to watch people who would, the kids say why, and then they sit down and they talk to them for like 15 minutes about, well, mommy's tired and she needs a little break and it would be so nice of you, and they go into this and I'm like, you are giving them way too much information. Like they are going to so manipulate you after that, right? Because that's what they do. So sometimes you just have to say, because I said so.
I think Luke gets this last remark from Harry Potter. He's thinking of Snape. Actually, that's a very interesting thought. I would like Luke to come on and explain what he means by that. Because I wouldn't necessarily affirm that, but but he might be pointing towards something which I do think is interesting.
Is it that it's parasitic, so it has to latch on to something else?
I don't know. I don't know what Luke means. You'd have to come in and tell us.
Well, I mean, Satan is the adversary, right? I mean, Satan is kicking around in the halls of heaven when in the book of Job.
Right.
So, yeah, if you want to put it that way.
I think that's what, the Job conversation might have that's why that was also in the back of my mind that might have put him onto it, but the Snape thing was funnier, so.
Thinking back on it a little bit, I think Job needed to provide an answer to Satan in a way. I think Satan was there like, there's a hole in your reasoning. You have the law, which is supposed to be this perfect good bad filter, and look, it's not working right. And he's like, God, I need an answer to plug this hole or to get out of this framing because it's not sufficient. I need to get to the next level of a sufficient integrity to my belief system.
I have this theory, and I'll just throw it out here because I love being heretical. But I have this theory that Satan, because Eliphaz has a dream, and he dreams about this really dark spirit that's hovering over him, and he isn't sure. Like, I don't think Eliphaz himself is actually quite clear on whether or not it's God or something else. Mm-hmm. But he shares it with Job as a way to get Job to repent. Okay, this is his motivation. He says, okay, listen, Job, look, puts his arm around him. I know you're having a hard time. This is at the beginning, okay, before he starts dragging Job through the mud. And he says, look, I had this dream, and maybe this will help you out. And the dream, and in the dream, the spirit says, there is no one righteous. Okay? And this is Job's claim. Job's claim is he's righteous. I never did anything wrong, right? So Eliphaz is like, nobody can say that, Job, right? And this spirit told me that. So you need to listen up. And so I have this theory that, excuse me, that Satan doesn't believe that about humanity. He sees them as weak, okay? And he's looking, and God's going, I'm going to do something amazing with these things here, with these people, right? With my children. And it's so amazing that, even the angels would like to know what it is, right? These are things that angels would like to know, which of course, which Satan is one of them, right? And he's given the job of poking around and being the adversary, right? That's his job. Like God says, what have you been up to? You doing your job? And Satan's like, oh, I'm just, wandering around. And then God says, well, have you seen Job? Like that. Just sit with that verse for a little while, and so Satan is like, nobody is righteous, right? This whatever God's doing with this plan of his, it's ridiculous. These things are made out of the dust of the earth, right? But God is saying, and he says always, that his strength is made perfect in weakness. And that's what Satan perceives in humanity. Weakness, okay? So this is why, a lot of people say God and Satan make a bet. I don't think they make a bet. God doesn't bet, okay? He knows. He knows that his strength is made perfect in weakness. So when Satan says, yeah, well, you got him all protected, just take that away and he'll, he won't handle it. God's like, have at it. Have at it. Because I know, right? So this is my theory.
I think Satan there is using truth as a weapon. Peterson talks about this, right? That someone can use the truth, even if it is the truth, in order to undermine or destroy someone else. I'm also thinking of maybe there's a connection.
Can I just say, Neil?
Sure,
can I just say something about that? And when people are using truth that way, they are actually in order to do that, they have to rip truth apart from the good and the beautiful, and point only at truth in order to use truth in that way. But I just want to say that really quick, because if you're maintaining an eye on the good, the true, and the beautiful, the convergence of the transcendent properties, you can't use truth in that way. It's only when you decide to focus on truth and isolate it from the other transcendental properties and put it as if the other transcendental properties were not just as important as truth, that you can begin to weaponize truth in that way. But
yeah, it's that deconstruction that aims to destroy and tear down versus edify. What was it that PVK was talking about? I forget his exact verbiage, but it's like when you split the thing apart in order to destroy it and undermine it versus. But what I wanted to bring into this is Ecclesiastes, because is there a connect? I have no idea if there is a connection. I think they're written around similar time frames, Job and Ecclesiastes, but where thus says the preacher, all is vanity. There's everything you do is vanity, and so one possible outcome of that is, okay, if none of it matters, then I can do whatever I want or whatever it is, right? Or if all of it's vanity, then it doesn't matter if I do this much good or this much good, because it's all just vanity anyway. But there's that temptation that Satan, I think, offers Job in that dream that Sherry was mentioning, where there's no such thing as a truly righteous person, so why even bother pursuing righteousness? Yeah, I think there's some debate as to how old the Job story is, but you might be right. It might be like 400 BC as opposed to 100 BC. Yeah, I don't know.
It's actually Job is actually considered to be very, very old by many scholars. It seems to more genuinely reflect a Bronze Age perspective than later books. So it definitely feels old. I think there are definitely, well, of course, I mean, there are certain portions of it that are definitely later. But at least the core of the book is quite old. But that's really kind of like secondary point anyway. Because it's timeless.
Definitely. Yeah, it kind of calls to mind the flood stories, with Noah and the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's like one of these things that have been around for a long time. It seems like a very archetypal sort of story.
How would it be possible to be wiser and simultaneously less righteous than someone? I would say that it is impossible if you know it, unless you have a very misguided notion of what wisdom is. Because wisdom is a property of the Godhead, just, which is as Bulgakov has it um, um, as essentially wisdom, love, glory, and so if you the only true wisdom is knowledge of that source, and you can't have knowledge of that source without it also containing the love and the glory as well as the wisdom. And so it it's there's a way in which righteousness is wisdom. Like you can't separate the two. So no, you can't have someone who you can have someone who has I don't even want to say knowledge because to me like knowledge to me knowing is loving and loving is knowing. So I don't even want to say has more knowledge, but let's say has more knowledge according to like the kind of paradigm of knowledge that our culture operates with as a default, which is a knowledge is information kind of knowledge. So certainly could have someone who has more knowledge in the knowledge of information sense, but is less righteous. But not remotely connected to wisdom.
Well, I'm not sure. Like, see, this is the thing that bothers me the most about these words. They're so ossified. Wisdom and righteousness. Like, I'm sorry, I don't think we know what righteousness is. Because if we did, we wouldn't be confounded by the book of Job.
We know the opposite, though. I always go to opposites for that. It's like we know evil when we see it and when we experience it.
Do we, though?
I don't think we do either.
Do we?
Oh, I think so. I think so. I think so.
We often misperceive evil.
Mm-hmm.
How about that which enjoys the suffering of another person? Because that to me is evil. And there have been times in my life where
Sorry,
I know...
you broke up there on me a little bit, Neil. Do you want to repeat that?
Yeah, there have been times in my life where I know that other people have enjoyed...
I'm not saying
my suffering.
Is it me?
Oh,
Sherry?
It must be just you. I can hear Neil fine.
Oh, okay. I guess it's just like something wrong on my end. I'll just shut up and let you guys talk then.
Well, Jordan Peterson did such a great job with this. It's like, could we at least assume that, we might not know what righteousness is, but we know what the opposite is, and could we?
Well, but Neil, like this is the whole argument that the Job's friends are making. They think they know, right? They think they know what righteousness is. So they think they know what wicked is. And Job says something to them like, well, wait a minute. No, the wicked are actually happy.
Well,
they're having children. Their children are laughing. Their cows are fat. There's good stuff going on here, people. It's good.
Here, let me put this a different way. This might be better. So this reflects a difference between me and my own father's thinking. Because my father will say something like, I ask God to just forgive my sins because I don't know all of my sins. So I just ask God to forgive my sins because who am I to know what my sins are? And part of me is like, yeah, that's absolutely right. But another part of me is like, no. There's still a responsibility to do our darndest to do that daily or weekly examine and to look at ourselves as carefully as we possibly can. Or in Kierkegaardian terms, you could say applying the objective lens towards oneself and the subjective lens towards others. So it's a both and. I'm going to do a Lukeism here. It's a both and, in that I think we don't necessarily know righteousness, but that to just say, oh, we can't pursue the good or something like that, I think it's even more
I don't
dangerous.
think that's what I was saying.
No, I'm only
Like, to not know what righteousness is doesn't mean you can't pursue the good. Like, don't get me wrong, right? We think we can follow something if we have identified it. Oh, look, there's a bear. I'm going to follow that bear, right? Or, oh, look, there's a sign on the highway. It says to go, 20 kilometers and then turn left. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. But that's not the Christian path. The Christian path is living in the moment, living in the present, putting one foot in front of the other. And we don't always know what we're going to do, or where we're going to be, or what's going to approach us, or, what's going to leave us. We don't know those things. We don't know the future, right? And so, like this gets to that whole Chinese farmer story, right? Where he's like, his neighbors say, oh, that's good. And he says, well, maybe. And then something else happens and they say, oh, that's bad. And he says, well, maybe, and as the story progresses, it becomes very obvious that we don't really know what's good and bad. Right. So, but we know to do the right thing. We know what that is because we have a conscience that's given to us from God. And we know when we cross it. We know when we do. And we cross it, right? We cross our consciences all the time. And then we get a little note in the mail that says, that was not good, right? But that's harkens back for me to integrity, okay? That's that whole person inside of us. And this is what Job's holding on to, right? So his conscience is saying, don't fall prey to what they're saying. It's not true. It has nothing to do with what's happening to you right now.
I think the difficulty comes in when we get an image of like where to go, where the path of righteousness is, and we stay very rigid to it, and that's still small voice comes to us in the moment as we're traversing that path that we've laid out already. We have a plan, and now there's a conflict. It's like, well, I have a moment of doubt here, and sometimes it turns out that it's like, yeah, I should have listened to that, and other times it's like, man, I should have stayed the course. And so there's this ambiguity that constantly confounds us.
And that's how we learn. I think like this conversation is so parallel to the essay from George MacDonald last night, that, and not because I'm there and talking about it, but we do read through the whole essay, and there's a link to the essay actually in the description. So I would just encourage anybody to, either read the essay or listen to the thing that we did last night, me and Luke Johnston. But
can I tell? Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. Go. Can I tell a quick story that I think is pertinent to this? Or
yeah,
two-minute story.
We're okay. Always here for your stories.
So I was becoming Catholic probably 2018, 2019. This was definitely before COVID, and I was getting better at like managing. I was feeling like I was getting more righteous, you could say, because I was feeling like my resentment was having a less and less grip over me over time. But then I woke up one morning and I went to go make my morning coffee, and Mr. Coffee is broken. So already I'm in a bad mood because Mr. Coffee is broken. And so I'm like, all right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop at McDonald's. I'm going to get coffee and a little bit of breakfast, and then I'll go to Walmart. Okay, so I go to McDonald's, and the lady taking the McDonald's coffee, she's got gloves on. She hands me the cup of coffee. Okay, this is the hottest cup of coffee that I have ever felt in my entire, like, as the minute she passes the coffee over to me, I am so startled by the heat that I go like, and the coffee, it comes out of the top and it goes onto my pants, and my thighs are burning, and it seeps down under my pants into the seat. And so I lurch out of my seat like this. And so my car, and this poor McDonald's worker, this lady, she just stares at me in horror, like, as my car like lurches forward into the drive-through, and I can't. So I finally get the cup of coffee onto the side, and my thighs are burnt, my butt is burnt. I finally get control over the car, and I pull into like a spot where you typically wait for McDonald's food, and then I'm sitting there for about 5 seconds, like, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm breathing like, and then I just start laughing hysterically. I start laughing hysterically in that moment. And I'm like, really, God? Really? Like, you're going to break my coffee maker. And then now I have like 2nd-degree burns on my thighs and probably 1st-degree burn. It probably wasn't that bad. But I had to, and then like 6 months or a year later, I read that McDonald's settled this lawsuit for like very burnt coffee or whatever. But like and when I told that story to people, they're like, you totally should have sued. And in that moment, I'm almost done. In that moment, I had nothing but joy over the fact that I had no desire for revenge or no anger whatsoever. I laughed at the ridiculousness of my morning. The morning that I had planned with my plans to do something, and this stupid coffee maker broke, and then I end up with burns and I have to change my pants and finally get to Walmart to buy a new Mr. Coffee to finally start my morning. Like, but my ability to have joy in that ridiculous moment that meant the world to me, because that meant that I was a much better Neil than I was even like a year or two prior. I was so grateful for that experience of the terrible experience. I was so grateful for. And so my point is, like, we may not know what we're aiming for, but we definitely get clues along the way that, let's say, we're trending in the right direction.
I would just ask the question, like, why would you describe that movement as a movement toward righteousness instead of a movement towards holiness?
Yeah, so there's the words again, Sherry, that I agree with you completely, that
righteousness has,
yeah,
to me, righteousness is wrapped up in some kind of legal ease, right? It means that now you've qualified, right? You've checked off all the boxes, and you've been declared whatever, righteous or innocent, or right. You get your free ticket. Holiness, though, is something that is it's what's the word? Sacred, right? Set apart. And so that was the first thing that I thought of when you started talking about that. And then the other thing is, I just wanted to read from a short thing from the essay last night. Therefore, friends, the practical thing is just this, and it is the one lesson we have to learn, that whatever our doubts or difficulties, we must do the thing we know in order to learn the thing we do not know. But whether we learn it or not, if, quote, if we know these things, saith the Master, happy are ye that do them, right? The thing you know. Do the thing you know, and you will be happy, is what Jesus says, right? It is the doing that is everything. And the doing is faith. So he doesn't make a distinction between faith and works, okay? He says that faith is the most difficult work a man can do. It is a work, okay? And there is no division between them. So, yeah, I mean, I would just love to read the whole essay at this point, but I won't. You guys can go listen to the thing from yesterday.
Yeah.
But we have to do the thing we know in order to find out what we don't know, right? And I mean, anybody who's worked on a car or planted a garden for the first time or built Duplo with their kid knows this, right? You got to start somewhere. And while you do the thing, you find out what you don't know.
Yeah, I've been reading Romans, and Romans 1, 18 and 19 really stand out to me a lot. It's basically what can be known of God is known through people who pursue things in an unrighteous way, like lessons learned almost. And maybe righteousness is kind of like that, but with a different attitude, with a different orientation. Like you can get the blessing through the adversity and it doesn't wind up being suffering. It's edifying.
Mm.
I wonder, Sherry.
I'm just talking way too much.
No. I just wonder. Here we are. Talking on Shabbat for our Jewish friends, so none of them are going to be here to help us out. But I wonder here what the full meaning of whatever the Hebrew word is that conveys righteousness is in comparison to our English word, because I think that when God validates the righteousness of Job, that God is validating it in certainly more than a legalistic sense. And in fact, but maybe his friends are reading it. So I wonder what all the nuances are there, because maybe his friends are seeing Job's righteousness in a legalistic sense, and they're kind of prosecuting the legal case against Job. It's like, no, Job, if you were really righteous and really without guilt, and this wouldn't have happened to you. But when God upholds Job, God has a different thing in mind from what his friends do, which is like connected to this notion that Sherry was talking about of integrity or holiness. And you also wanted to say holy as opposed to righteous, and holy clearly has a connection to wholeness.
Right. And like for me as a Christian, the story of Job and the story of the prodigal son are very parallel. Because what the prodigal son doesn't know is that he is the son of the Father. Right? And so he thinks that he's part of a, tribe, and that he can take his share of the money that he's owed. So this is all very legalese, right? This is mine. My right is to have that. I'm going to take that and I'm going to go. Thank you very much. He doesn't leave knowing that he's the son of the Father. He leaves thinking that he has, fulfilled all his, responsibilities. Now he's going to take his share and he's going to go do his thing. And then he gets, he loses everything. Of course, we know the story. And then he's in with the pigs, and he thinks, well, my dad is actually really good to the servants, so maybe I can go get a job with him. At least I'll have a roof over my head, right? And food in my belly. He still doesn't know who he is. He's the son. And the father, when he sees him coming, he gets the party stuff out, right? And the coat. And he's celebrating because now his son has returned to him, right? And Jesus says, I have come to reveal the Father, right? So what is a father if he doesn't have his son? Is a father if he has no son? No, he's not. If anybody's listening and is not yet married and has no children, he is a man who has not yet been revealed by his son as a father. You know what I'm saying? So when Jesus says, I have come to reveal the Father, he's revealed in the Son, because a father is only revealed in his children. Okay? And this is what Job is hanging on to. This is his integrity. I am a child of God. He's my creator. He has to answer for this. He put me here. I don't get it. Nothing is making any sense to me. Right? That's the cry of a child to a father. So, like, this is what this story is about that we're in. It's not about how good you are, how much you've sinned. If, am I holy? Am I righteous? What am I? You are, I'm just preaching here, a child of God. And you're going to act like a child, which means you're going to suckle at the breast, and you're going to shit your pants, and you're going to crawl on your knees, and you're going to stand up at a table one day and say, look at me, right? And you're just going to grow up.
What about the elder brother?
The elder brother didn't know who he was either. And this is the interesting thing for me, because what this revealed to me is that because he didn't know who he was, his response was rivalry. Right? He didn't know who he was, and he didn't know who his brother was. If they both knew that they were the sons of the Father, they would be on equal ground.
Well, it's also evident that neither son trusted their father, which is why the one son has an impatience to get his inheritance now, and the other son never has the courage to ask for anything.
Yeah, well, this is George MacDonald's point in the Voice of Job sermon. Neither one of them made a claim on him.
Right.
Okay? Like the one in the pig pen said, I'll just go be a servant. And the one who stayed home thought, well, he should just notice what I'm doing. I don't have to tell him. Right? He should just know. Oh, here I am. Like all this time. And I didn't get a party. Right?
Right, yeah.
Because he didn't make a claim. He didn't say, hey, Dad, could you give me a party? Because his dad would have said, sure, I'll give you a party. Right? Because you're my son.
It's almost like somebody told us to ask.
Oh, yeah. Hello.
And that asking is important. This is like I know Jonathan Peugeot hated it, but I actually thought that the Green Knight movie that came out recently actually had some elements of it that were powerfully Christian, and particularly the near the end of the film, like when the Green Knight, who clearly has the Green Knight, the Green Knight clearly has was clearly designed to resemble the Green Man, which has clear overtones and connections to Christ, which is why the Green Man decorates medieval churches in England. And he says to Gawain, when he's about to deliver the killing blow, Gawain asks, is this all that there is? And what he says is, what else should there be? I think that God does ask us that question, and it's a very hard question.
Well, this is the question that Jesus says, who do you say that I am? Okay.
Right. He's like God is not just pretending to give us fake agency in the world. He gives us real agency in the world.
So
and dares to ask us, what else should there be?
Hang on a minute, Neil. I just want to address this here, because Phoebus says he's so mad because the father gave away what he thought was his. Okay, so this is the really cool part. Okay, so the son that went away took his share, his inheritance, and when he came back, he got a party. Okay, so this is elaborate. Like, this is expensive. The coat, the food, all the stuff, right? So was there a limit to what he had? No. He entered the kingdom, okay? He entered the kingdom, and the kingdom was abundant. Everything that was the Father's was his. So he was under the illusion that he had only a part. But the Father showed him when he returned that everything was his. It was all his, and it was abundant.
Right. And both sons are operating under the illusion of scarcity.
Right.
One
Right.
because he's operating under the illusion, under the delusion of scarcity. He wants what he thinks he's entitled to now, and he doesn't want to wait for it because who knows what might, like, his father might lose his fortune and he might not inherit anything, and who knows what might happen. He doesn't. He has a scarcity mindset. Same thing with the older son who never asks.
Right. And it's like that parable of the vineyard workers, right? Where some have been there for the whole day and some just showed up like 5 minutes before quitting time, and they all got paid the same amount, right? But, in my opinion, they all got paid the same amount because they're all worth the same amount and to God, right? And so when that happens, there's no rivalry, right? But the thing is, the ones that start at the beginning of the day, they think that they're more important, okay? That they've put in more time, like the prodigal, like the son that stayed home. I put in more time. I've been here longer. I've been putting up with all your shit forever. And you give him a party, right?
But it's the opposite, because they had 11 hours to work in the garden. That's their blessing. They had 11 hours to work in the garden. This other guy, he only had an hour to work in God's garden.
Right.
So the blessing is you had 11 hours to work in the vineyard or work in the. Sorry,
Yeah.
I wanted to go. So I wanted to ask a theological.
No,
question.
that's very good, Neil. And I think that sometimes like Jewish thinkers like do a better job of emphasizing what a blessing it is to be here in this life where we can do God's work.
I wanted to go back to, and Bi Mills is really great to meet you.
Oh, are you leaving?
Luke, Luke.
Yeah, I gotta
criticized
go
us
take care of the kids.
that we didn't ask you enough
Bye,
questions. So
Thanks for coming.
hope to see you again.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, it was really great.
Thank you.
Hey, Sherry, did you see who was in the chat earlier?
No.
Roger Buck.
Oh, I did see that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Right,
Sorry.
Roger, for those who don't know, Roger Buck is like another noted commenter on the article of Valentin Thunberg. So,
yeah.
So I'd like to talk about who do you say that I am in relation to the parable of the wedding feast. So the parable of the wedding feast. So the master of the banquet invites all the standard people, and they say, "I'm too busy, can't do this." They can't attend the wedding feast, right? So then he invites everybody, "Come on in for the wedding feast." Okay, so here's the piece that I've tried to think about a lot, and I have some opinions on it, but I'm interested in your thoughts. Because what happens is the master says to the guy, he says, "Hey, friend, where is your wedding garment?" And he specifically calls him friend. And then after the guy's silent, then he says, "Throw him out into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." But he starts, what's so weird about it is he starts by calling the guy friend, and then says, where is your wedding garment? So I'm convinced that it's only because that guy in that moment is silent and has nothing to say to God, has nothing to say to the master of the banquet. That's the reason he's thrown out. And it's kind of, anyway, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. And he's not wearing the garment because he's not ready for the kingdom. Yes, but there's still the potential up until the end, like the thief on the cross, where we can be granted that garment even at the very end. But I'm curious what your interpretation of the wedding garment is.
Of what the wedding garment is?
Or sorry, I'm curious of your interpretation of that parable and the reason why he's thrown out. Is it because he's not wearing the garment, or is it because he doesn't answer?
Okay, well,
the master of the banquet?
I'm just going to wing it because I haven't really thought about this, but the weeping and gnashing of teeth to me is resentment and bitterness. Okay, it's not suffering in hell. It's not being tormented. It's somebody who's like grinding their teeth and they're angry and they're bitter. And so if I look at it that way, and this is my way of looking at it, just to be clear. If he goes out angry and bitter, it's because whatever he was wearing didn't pass the sniff test, right? And he thought it would. So I'm coming with what I want to wear to this wedding feast. And the master says, well, this is a wedding feast. Like, you're just inappropriately dressed, buddy. Right? Where's your wedding clothes? And the guy says nothing. And then he gets sent out because he doesn't have his wedding clothes, right? And to me, it's hubris that he's, it's not like we would like, I think we would like to say something like, oh, the poor guy, he didn't have the right clothes, so he couldn't come in, right? Because that's the doctrine of election, essentially. But it's hubris on his part, right? And he is a friend. He is immediately a friend because that's how God is, in my opinion. But because of his hubris, he goes out, he gets sent out, and he is bitter and angry about it. So that's my quick try at that parable. But I'll have to think about it more.
I think Neil, that's interesting. I think you're wanting to say that the lack of response is a part of it is interesting. I'd never thought about it. To be honest, that is interesting. I'll have to, that's when I'll have to go back and look and tell you what I think at some other time. But I think you're not wanting to at least put as much emphasis on the fact that there is no garment as that he has no answer as to why he has no garment.
Well, that's what I'm pointing at too, though,
Yeah.
Nate. Like,
yeah, I know. Yeah.
His lack of response is arrogant, right? It's arrogance. Because he doesn't think he has to enter into a dialogue. He doesn't ask any questions.
But when the younger son of the prodigal son returns, he does have something to say to his father, right? He does say to his father, what's the exact thing? But he says, Father, I'm not worthy except to be treat me as one of your hired servants. Sorry, I'm distracted by Big Mo.
I had to show that one.
but the younger son doesn't just come back. Like, he does have a response to his father, and he is at least contrite. I don't know if he's fully repentant, but
I don't know. I mean, he's beaten down. He's had the snot beaten out of him. He's lost all his money, and but he's not going there for his he's not going there to be the son. He's going there to be the servant. Right?
Yes. Yeah, I think to the soldier comes to Jesus and says, Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word and my soul shall be healed. But it is that foray in contrite humility, but still it's aimed at Christ that then opens the door to that relationship. Yeah.
Sherry and Neil, if you guys want to keep this going, I'm perfectly happy to allow you to do so. Sherry, I just saw my wife poking in a second ago, so I might have to.
I had plenty of time. I had plenty of time. Thank you both.
Okay.
I actually have to go too.
All right, we'll just call this a wrap for this time.
Yeah.
Lots of folks would like to see you in here. Maybe next time you can come on in.
Yeah, it would be great.
I saw some new names I hadn't seen before, so. Mm-hmm. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a blessed Saturday.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.